Good afternoon. My name is Jack Himes, and I'm the moderator for today's Technology Tuesday webinar. And today's presentation will be on alternative uses for scrap gypsum wallboard. Next slide. The Recycling Market Center is proud to host the Technology Tuesday webinar series. The RMC was established in 2004 as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We have 5 full-time employees. We're located at Penn State Harrisburg with a satellite office in Pittsburgh. We are governed by a 9-member board of directors. Our employees include Bob Bailone, Melanie Morrison, Wayne Bowen, myself, and also Pete Previte. Pete is located in the Pittsburgh office. The RMC programming, or what we do, include things such as the Technology Tuesday webinars. And we had our first webinar 3 months ago, and that was on the innovation in optical sorting technologies. Today's webinar, Alternatives to Disposal of Gypsum Wallboard Waste, and our next Technology Tuesday webinar will be on green roof technology, or possibly Lean Six Sigma, depending on the availability of presenters. The PA Recycling Market Center is proud to present the Technology Tuesday webinar series. These webinars highlight various types of equipment used to sort and or process materials that have been collected for recycling. Each session will give an overview of how this equipment works and the benefits that it provides in producing recycled material feedstocks with less contamination and potentially higher value. When possible, users of equipment or technologies will be invited to discuss how this equipment or process has helped improve their recycling efforts. Our 2 speakers today, Joseph LaQuatra from Cornell University, and Terry Weaver, president and owner of U.S.A. Gypsum. Today's first speaker, Joseph LaQuatra, PhD. He's a professor in the Department of Design and Environmental Analysis at Cornell University. He focuses his teaching and research efforts on sustainable aspects of housing. He has studied waste management as the residential construction site since 1995 and has presented his findings at international and national conferences and has published them in numerous journals. An extension housing specialist, Joe develops and implements educational programs on these and other topics through the statewide network of Cornell University Cooperative Extension. He has conducted educational programs for home builders in partnership with the National Association of Home Builders. He has also taught builders, engineers, architects, and government officials in Poland, Russia, and Japan. Joe is past president of the Housing, Education, and Research Association and served 2 terms as chair of the National Consortium of Housing Research Centers. And with that, I'll turn it over to Joe LaQuatra to present his topic today.
Thank you, Jack. And good afternoon, everyone. As you can see on the title slide, Alternatives to Landfilling Gypsum Wallboard Waste, I produced this PowerPoint presentation with my colleague in the Department of Design and Environmental Analysis, Mark Pierce. And Mark has actively participated in this research project on waste management at the construction site since 1995. We have quite a few publications available, and if anyone is interested, please send me an email to jl27@cornell.edu, and I'll give you a list of what we have, and you can tell me what you want, and I'll be able to send it to you electronically. So gypsum is still a challenge in recycling C&D debris, or construction and demolition debris. Gypsum goes by several names. It's also called wallboard, drywall, and lots of people mistakenly refer to it as sheetrock. That's a brand name for wallboard by U.S. Gypsum. I once had the opportunity to talk to some folks at U.S. Gypsum, and they really like it when people call it sheetrock. They compare it to the way a lot of people call tissues Kleenex, and it just reinforces their brand. But whatever we want to call it, it is the most popular interior wall and ceiling finish material in the United States. Gypsum is composed of calcium sulfate dihydrate, which is mined from dried seed beds. It also has a paper backing and a number of proprietary ingredients that differ by manufacturer. One manufacturer even includes soap in it. There are different types. There's regular gypsum board, moisture resistant, fire resistant, and a veneer plaster base. And it comes in different thicknesses. It does make up the largest component in the construction and demolition waste stream. For new homes, the average new home produces about 1,700 pounds of gypsum waste. And that comes down to about 1 pound of gypsum waste per square foot of home built. And we get so much scrap, and I can speak to this as a drywall installer and finisher in another life, but installers limit the amount of finishing that's required by using full sheets wherever possible and then cutting the openings for window openings, doors, electrical outlets, registers, and whatever else penetrates that material. So how do we manage drywall waste? Now, the traditional way has been to dispose of it in landfills, but more and more there are possibilities for recycling it. Landfilling gypsum waste, though, is becoming problematic. Landfills in the United States recover and use methane gas that's produced by the decomposition of buried organic waste. But under anaerobic conditions, as gypsum board decomposes, hydrogen sulfide can be produced, and that is accomplished by sulfate-reducing bacteria, which are common in anaerobic environments. And hydrogen sulfide degrades the quality of methane, and that makes it a problem when methane gas is being recovered. So there are coming into existence more frequently landfill bans on gypsum waste throughout the United States. So what are some of the landfilling alternatives? An early study on managing waste at the construction site was conducted by the National Association of Home Builders Research Center, and they produced a booklet that was distributed to home builder associations across the United States and to home builders upon request. But they actually did suggest that gypsum waste be cut into small pieces and then put into uninsulated interior partitions as a way of getting rid of them. But that proposal was never really followed through, and some people actually ridiculed it. We can recycle new drywall now, and there are companies that are doing this, and we will hear our next speaker, Wayne, talk about that. And the company Gypsum Recycling America also operates in Europe and Asia. There's a growing interest in this because builders now have incentives to recycle waste that's produced at the construction site, including drywall, because they get points toward green certification, whether that is through LEED, which is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, or ICC 700, which was the originated as the NAHB Green Building Guidelines. And recycling can actually be cheaper than landfilling. And while green building certification programs do provide incentives for builders to recycle gypsum board waste, there is a growing use of synthetic gypsum by drywall producers. Synthetic gypsum is formed as a byproduct of the process to remove sulfur dioxide from flue gases of coal-fired power plants. And synthetic gypsum and naturally occurring gypsum ore are virtually identical chemically. And while older gypsum board plants were capable of mixing synthetic and natural gypsum, new plants are being designed to produce wallboard only with synthetic gypsum. Next slide. And while new plants can still mix synthetic gypsum with recycled gypsum, it turns out that gypsum recyclers can't compete economically with synthetic gypsum. So some wallboard producers are building their factories near coal-fired power plants to reduce the cost of transporting synthetic gypsum. So it's a dilemma that from a green building viewpoint, it's encouraging to see a component of power plant waste being used to produce another product, in this case synthetic gypsum, which can then produce wallboard. So how else can we divert gypsum from landfills? There are other uses for waste gypsum. It can be used as a cement ingredient, filler for stucco, as a precipitant to remove solids from turbid water, even as cat litter ingredient. It can be used as a soil amendment. It increases the pH of overly acidic soil, but this isn't allowed everywhere. It's regulated in many states by environmental agencies. In New York State, that would be the Department of Environmental Conservation. So there are other uses for waste gypsum. It can be mixed with sludge for bulking and drying. It can facilitate the leaching out of sodium salt in soil along roads where salt is placed during the winter. It can be mixed with animal waste to reduce odor, combined with wood shavings for animal bedding. And it makes up over 90% of the inert material in some flea powders. And that list for other uses is growing. Here are a couple more. It can be used on shop floors as a grease absorbent. It can be used to mark lines on athletic fields. You can see that there are a number of them. These next few slides, I want to talk to you about a research project that we conducted at Cornell University in conjunction with the Home Builders Institute and the National Association of Home Builders. And this was done in the late 90s. Next slide. We were approached by RDR Construction in Highland Mills, New York, and you can see the names of the principals of that firm. At the time, they were concerned about the money that they were spending for tipping fees at landfills. They were about to build a development of 10 houses, and they asked Mark Pierce and me if we could use this development as a case study, and they agreed to set one house aside where they wouldn't put any of the waste material into the dumpsters until we had a chance to look at it. This is the house, and we visited that house at every stage of construction, and that meant from the framing phase to the roofing, siding, electrical wiring and plumbing, insulation, drywall installation, and so on. And we weighed and calculated the volume of everything that was being thrown away. And you can see the totals here, from solid wood to manufactured wood, vinyl siding, asphalt roofing, brick, and metal. Next slide, please. And then here is the interior finish phase, waste building material. And there, gypsum right up at the national average, 1,788 pounds. So gypsum was the largest component of that. I mentioned this was in the 90s, and we didn't have the alternatives to landfilling that we do now. We're hoping at some point to be able to replicate that study, but are still looking for funding. So I mentioned that we have publications on these topics available, and if you are interested, please send me an email, and I will give you the list of what we have available. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joe. That was very good. I would like to make a comment for the audience that at any time, if you have questions, in the GoToWebinar control panel, there is a block where you can type in a question about the presentation that you just heard, or about the one that you're going to hear in just a minute from Terry Weaver. And at the end of both presentations, then we will set aside some time to go through the questions, ask the presenter or both presenters to provide an answer to that question. One question for Joe is, could you give your email address again, please?
Yes, that's jl27@cornell.edu.
Okay, and we'll, I think that's on your information here, or maybe not. I don't see
No,
it
I don't
here.
see it there.
But our presentations will be available within a couple of weeks on our website. So if anyone wants to follow up and review what was presented, they'll be able to obtain copies of this, including the audio. Joe, one other question for you. You had mentioned possible use as an ingredient in cement of gypsum wallboard waste.
Yes.
Is that getting to be a big area of concentration and investigation, or has that not received much attention so far?
I haven't seen a whole lot on that. I did find a reference that that is one of the many uses that it's being used for.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good. Well, thank you, Joe, and I'm sure we'll get back to you in a little while when we have more questions. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Terry Weaver. He is president of U.S.A. Gypsum, and Terry has a 30-year background in agriculture and construction. Mr. Weaver served as president of an international agricultural construction firm, as well as owning and operating farms in Pennsylvania. For the past 12 years, Mr. Weaver has focused on expanding wallboard recycling and developing applications for recycled gypsum. He is involved in many industry associations and has presented to various governmental agencies and national conventions. So now I'll turn it over to Terry Weaver for his presentation.
Good afternoon from sunny central Pennsylvania. I'm glad to be here, and thanks for taking a few minutes to join me in talking about recycling wallboard. We started with this idea in 1997. It was actually my agronomist who balanced my soils and knew that people were using gypsum on the land, and also knew that there were people throwing large amounts of drywall away that was being installed in modular housing nearby. And so when we first got started, we had a few modular housing people nearby that were interested in giving us their scraps, which they did. We matched that up with some farms, including one of those. My uncle nearby was one of the first customers to use gypsum, and we spread it on the fields, much like you can see in the picture on this slide. I think that might make us the oldest surviving U.S.A. drywall recycler. There was a few started about the same time. Most of those are no longer in business. So one of the things that I think is always interesting is just to try to take a look at what the market really is. In the United States in 2011, 14.2 million tons of drywall were produced. by factories, and the USGS actually tracks that and reports on that quarterly, so that's where that number comes from. Then trying to figure out how much scrap is generated, I have to piece together some various reports actually to do some estimating, and so some of these are actually my estimates. I estimate the total is about 4.4 million tons, some from renovation, some actually generated during the manufacturing process at new plants that are in excess of what they can blend back into new board. And you have the demolition portion, and finally new scraps from construction. New scraps are by far the largest percentage, about 64% of the total. As we drill down a little bit farther into the area that we service, which is the Northeast, the USGS breaks the numbers down in the Mid-Atlantic region, which includes New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, and that would be the area where most of our wallboard scraps originate. About 2005, 2006 was, of course, the peak of the construction boom, and since that time, national sales of wallboard and shipments have actually dropped about 50%. However, in the Mid-Atlantic region, we're fortunate in that we didn't have nearly the drop that some of the sand states experienced, and you can see in the chart there how shipments of new board actually dropped from 2007 to 2010, and really we've been bouncing along very close to that 2010 number ever since. The first real increase we're seeing is the first half of 2012 is up 2% over 2011, and that, you know, possibly is not even worth talking about, but it is really the first prolonged increase of any sort. And multi-family housing in the region has increased actually 60% during that time, so that's a good portion of it. We estimate that 20% is wasted. That would equal 400,000 tons of scrap in this Mid-Atlantic region, and there are 4 official recyclers that we know of in the region, including us, and we believe that somewhere around 35,000 tons were recycled by the 4 facilities, and that would be approximately a 9% recycling rate. So we have a long way to go to divert the majority of the drywall from the area's landfills. At this point in time, not all types of wallboard can be recycled, and specifically here in Pennsylvania, we're operating under a general permit, and what we can recycle is any type of new gypsum-based wallboard products, including Type X fire-rated, and that makes up 89% of shipments. But what we can't recycle are some of the specialty boards, such as the green moisture-resistant, purple fire-resistant, or the gold exterior board. That's about 11% of shipments. We actually do some picking to get rid of any incidentals that we get in, and we are not permitted to recycle painted or demolition. So when I talk about 20% waste, some people, if they haven't worked with the industry, think that sounds high. And here's just an example of a green building project that we did where everything was tracked carefully in nearby Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's a Hilton hotel with 300 rooms, 19-story hotel. And you can see there 16,000 sheets of drywall were installed. It was 5/8 board. And that means that a total of 811 tons of wallboard were shipped to that job for installation, and we removed and recycled 175 tons, so 21.5% recycling rate in that project, and we find that to be be typical. Like any other rule, there are exceptions, and we recycled from this green building project. Again, this is a large apartment complex, 212 apartments. They used half-inch board in this, which is common in residential type facilities. And here there was 848 tons of wallboard shipped, but 268 tons recycled, so a total of 32%. That's abnormal from what we see. It opened up the contractor's eyes to look at his installers and see what they were really doing. A new phenomenon that's becoming increasingly important is almost all the manufacturers now are manufacturing a lightweight drywall, which is about 20 to 30% lighter in weight with the same strength and thickness. So as more of the lightweight drywall is integrated into the construction process, we'll see the tonnage of recycling come down from the same amount of construction. I'm not going to talk much about single-family homes. Joe did a nice job of touching on that. I concur with what he's seeing. Within about a 50-mile radius of our plant, we actually pick up from single-family homes. The drywallers will put it in the garage, and we'll come in with our truck, as you can see in the picture there, and pick it up. And we can do that within a fairly close proximity to our plant. Wallboard will always be recycled more efficiently when it can be source separated. That means that the waste is kept separate from the other waste generated on the site, doesn't get wet, doesn't get contaminated. The minute that drywall becomes commingled with all the other waste and gets wet, it becomes very, very difficult to separate out the drywall for recycling. So anytime that's an option, it will give you the highest percentage of recycling. There's several ways that we collect drywall, depends on the distance and the construction process and where the construction's located. In some construction projects where we have the room, we'll have different roll-off containers sitting in the job labeled for the various components of trash, drywall, wood waste, and various others. The other way that it's done sometimes is just the drywall is thrown out in a pile, or in a garage if that's convenient, something like that. They'll give us a call and we'll actually live load it at the job site. Obviously that's a lot of manual labor to live load it, but it does take care of the contamination issues that we experience with roll-off containers sitting on job sites, where even if you get the contractors trained to put the right trash in the right container, you have to deal with what we call drive-bys. That is, the neighbors putting their trash in it at night, and then of course that has to be dealt with at the recycling plant. Another method that we use in the city or in areas that are farther away and transportation is a bigger issue is we'll have the drywall installers stack their drywall scraps on pallets, and we'll pick it up with a truck that's suited to the quantity. Drywallers don't like stacking on the pallets, but we like it because it's very difficult to stack trash on those pallets. So we like that system. We set roll-off containers, they're designated and lettered appropriately on job sites. And there again, it just requires management on the job site for the contractors and the neighbors as well. But that's a common method of collecting drywall waste for us. One of the growing suppliers of drywall for us is an increasing number of construction waste recyclers, typically located in large cities, where commingled waste is brought to these facilities and then separated into the various recyclable factions. You'll see two red arrows, and unfortunately they have moved somehow. But there you'll see some piles of drywall if you look very carefully at the bottom of the picture. One more to the right corner and one midway to the left. Most of the recyclables actually get hand picked off a conveyor belt after it's scooped up and dumped into the process, and you may have one individual picking out wood, another one picking out cardboard, and each person picking out their individual recyclable and dropping it in the bin below their feet. One of the challenges with wallboard is that by the time it's dumped onto that floor, scooped up, picked, and dropped on the conveyor and handled, the pieces are so small that it's almost impossible to reclaim. So what they typically do is take the loads that have a high percentage of drywall in them, dump them out on the floor, and actually hand pick them down on the floor like we saw in the previous slide. But that has gone from 0% of our supply of drywall in 2006 to nearly half today. So we expect that source of drywall waste to continue to grow. Now this is our facility located in Reinholds, Pennsylvania. We have all of our activities enclosed. We worked with the Department of Environmental Protection here in Pennsylvania to come up with a general permit specifically for reclaiming drywall. That gives us beneficial use and actually legally de-waste the product. And also, kind of as another layer, that's something we did earlier before the beneficial use was there, we obtained a co-product determination, which also de-wastes our end products. We are primarily moving our products into various agricultural markets, and we have been doing a little over 20,000 tons a year for the last, I'd say 6 years. We had a few spikes and drops in there, but we've been over 20,000 tons. This is how the wallboard looks in most cases when it gets to us, and if you look carefully, you're going to see a few different colors in there. Most of the blue's okay. I might be able to see a little bit of green in there, and we're going to find some foreign material on. So before that product actually enters our process, we do a manual we call negative pick. That is, we're picking out any foreign material we can get our hands on and any prohibited incidental materials that would happen to come to us. As I said, most of our products are going into agricultural markets of one sort or another. On the left, you can see a retail bag we have for our lawn and garden gypsum. It breaks down mostly into two categories. One is a direct land application for lawn, gardens, farms, and the other is for animal bedding, which is the product that we've produced on the right called GripX, and we distribute those products throughout the northeastern United States. And now, as we talk about we talked about the drywall market earlier. Let's look at the actual gypsum market, which is how we need to move our end materials. In 2011, United States utilized 19 million tons of gypsum for its variety of uses. Of the 19 million tons, 8.9 million tons was mined. Synthetic was 7 million tons, and Joe touched on how synthetic gypsum is produced earlier in his presentation. And imported, which is typically mined, 3.3 million tons brought into the country. One of the things that's interesting is as more and more power plants, coal-burning power plants were forced to install devices to clean their air and produce increasing amounts of synthetic gypsum. 2010, the total numbers were 22 million tons produced. Couldn't find the current beneficial use for 2010, but I had a good number for 2009 that's showing 11 million tons of beneficial use, and it means that about half of all the synthetic gypsum being produced is being landfilled and or stockpiled. So it's a huge challenge, not only for the drywall recycling industry, but for the power plants that are producing it to find a way of getting beneficial use. Some of the challenges that we are facing, and anybody that seeks to get into the drywall recycling business would face, is the competition from synthetic gypsum. As I've shown in previous slide, there's an excess of it, and so companies are willing to definitely give it away, and there might even be some negative numbers to that some places. The EPA is also reviewing the status of all coal combustion products, and so that could have an effect on where synthetic gypsum can or cannot be beneficially used. So it would be another potential risk that we hope to have clarified in the next year or so. It's been under review, I think, for about 3 or 4 years. The other thing that we are really focused on as a company is the development of post-consumer products that would encapsulate the gypsum. And the reason for that being, we feel like if we had products where it could be encapsulated, then we'd be able to also process the demolition and specialty wallboard products that we're currently prohibited from recycling, and that raises the cost because at some point it has to be sorted, and we've got to maintain that quality control. And we're exploring some potential markets for that. We have a theory that we're trying to prove out, been working on for several years now. We believe that if done correctly, gypsum can actually be added to ready-mix concrete, and resulting in increased strength, reduced cracking, reduced weight, reduced cost of producing a ready-mix, and of course it'll increase the recycled content, which is of interest for people that are seeking LEED points or other green certifications. We've gone a little bit beyond just trial slabs. We have been supplying gypsum into some large commercial projects. This is a large distribution center, a $65 million investment, 900,000 square foot of building, and incorporated into that ready mix was 330 tons of gypsum. We've done several others, and we have a huge project coming up in the next few months. It's going to actually require about 550 tons of gypsum. So we're making some progress, but we're not where we'd like to be yet with that project. As we talk about, doing things like a ready mix additive, there are some other options, and we'd like to tie this into taking this back into a green building material, which is those volumes are expected to rise by 13% a year each through the year 2015. So ready-mix concrete, which I really touched on, would be one. Joint compound would be another. Gypsum cement underlayment floors, which are really common in some types of construction, and industrial plasticizers, along with soil stabilization, would all be potential markets where we could use potentially a combination of both new and specialty and demolition board. And that's this finally concludes it. I think that wallboard recycling is a proven solution. There's been a handful of us doing it here now for over 10 years. We've got our challenges, but there's also opportunities. We think we can keep it out of the landfills, which they're happy to see happen, and we think we can do it by at a reduced cost to whoever's generating that waste, and potentially save money to the consumer who ends up buying it, and hopefully that would be a win-win for everybody. And that's all.
Thank you, Terry. That was a very, very informative presentation, and goes well with Joe's presentation today also. So that's a look from several different levels at recycling of gypsum wallboard. There are a series of questions that we want to go through now. So let's look at this question. Actually, it's a question where both Joe and or Terry could comment, but let's let Terry have first crack at this. Are there any pros or cons or specific techniques for incorporating drywall waste into composting processes?
This is Joe. I have heard of that being used, and trying to remember what the answer. It's where you put that compost, and you have to know what type of soil you're putting that into. That's why there are no general recommendations for gypsum waste as a soil amendment, because soil types differ geographically everywhere. So you have to know what you're putting it into and how it's going to affect that soil.
This is Terry. We actually supply a few composters with gypsum that they're incorporating into their compost, and the recipe, of course, is proprietary, and they don't tell us how they're blending it exactly or what ratios. But the reason that they use it is it helps to flocculate the compost, which means it keeps it light and helps it to breathe. It also helps to hold the nitrogen because it converts it over to ammonium sulfate, which does not volatilize. And the more nitrogen you can hold in your compost, the easier it is to bring it up to temperature.
Okay, thank you. Next question. The alternative uses listed, precipitant, road salt removal, athletic fields, etc. Have these been tried and tested, or is this anecdotal information?
No, I found that in a literature search that these are current uses.
Okay, and is that literature, Joe, something you'd make available if somebody sent you an email request?
Yes, Mark Pierce and I wrote a chapter for a book on waste management that came out last year, and we devoted a section of our chapter to uses for gypsum. So I'd be happy to send the, and that's an in-tech book which is available online, and I'd be happy to send that link to anyone who sends me an email for it.
Okay, good.
Now, this is Terry. We've actually supplied PennDOT here in Pennsylvania and a couple of highways in Maryland, interstate highways, where they had excessive salt levels, and it was recommended they apply gypsum, and we were simply the supplier. We didn't specify the amount or why it should be used, but I can just say that we have supplied it for that purpose.
Okay, good. The next question, this attendee is curious to know if you've researched the issue of low concentrations of metals in synthetic gypsum and then its use in agriculture, question mark. Do you do any quality control testing on the material that is used for agriculture, and do you look for metals?
Terry, do you have the answer for that one?
Well, I can tell you what we're doing. We're required by the Department of Environmental Protection to do a full test, including heavy metals, every month, which we do. If somebody would like to see a compiled list of that, I'd be happy to share it. We have not seen any issues in the 10 plus years that we've been testing. So yes, we do look at a full heavy metals run on a monthly basis.
Okay, here's a question for Joe. Is there a way for the recycler to know if he is receiving synthetic gypsum?
Actually, Terry and I were talking about this earlier. Terry, why don't you share what you told me?
We cannot tell when it comes in, either by its appearance or its handling characteristics. So there's no way for us to know. We have looked at samples of synthetic gypsum being produced in the region just for our own information and ran full tests on it. We can lay those beside our tests, and they're identical. So nobody is really raising a red flag at this point on sources of synthetic gypsum in our region. I can't speak for what might be happening in other areas.
Any comments from you, Joe?
No, I just remembered my presentation. What I found in the literature is that synthetic gypsum and naturally occurring gypsum are chemically identical.
Okay. The next question, can you recycle gypsum that has a fiberglass facing instead of paper? Terry?
We cannot. We're not permitted for it, and it's just got a lot of fiberglass, usually around a 5% content. At some point, if we were to develop a steady and regular concrete product, I think it would be permitted and would be advantageous to be included in ready-mix concrete. But at this point, we cannot.
Joe, any comments?
No, I just agree with what Terry said. That's one complication in recycling.
Yep, okay. Next question, is gypsum added as a soil supplement to alter the pH, or is it an actual nutrient for the plants? Here in Colorado, the soil is low, basic in pH, and it's not clear whether it would be useful for crop cultivation to land apply gypsum.
Yeah, what I've seen in the literature is that it alters the pH, but it doesn't have any negative impacts on soils. But I haven't seen anything on what type, whether it's a nutrient.
Terry, any comments?
The only comment I would have is that it can alter pH in certain circumstances. It would depend whether it's a subsoil acidity issue or alum. It can also reduce pH in the case where it displaces magnesium. In Pennsylvania, probably only 10% of the soils would benefit from the use of gypsum, and most soils in Pennsylvania, for example, actually benefit more from the use of lime, which boosts the pH.
Next question. I think I'm hearing that both synthetic and natural gypsum are identical in the eyes of the recycler, i.e. both can be recycled easily. Is that correct, Terry?
I would say yes. In the region that we're in, gypsum from some of the old scrubbers was rumored to be inconsistent. We haven't seen that, and the wallboard manufacturers are probably very critical of that, of consistency from their standpoint in manufacturing quality wallboard. So we can't tell if it's synthetic from what we see.
Okay, next question. What are the recycling markets for central New York? Any local facilities or processors available? Question mark.
No, the last time Mark and I looked at that, and Terry, did you talk to Mark? Were you coming up to the Ithaca area, the central New York area? It was someone in Pennsylvania.
Yes, we do pick up from a company who stockpiles it in just outside Ithaca,
Hmm.
along with a handful of other people that collect wallboard and consolidate it so we can pick it up with tractor trailers for efficient transportation.
Thank you.
Okay, next question. Is there not a way to reuse clean wallboard materials when manufacturing new wallboard? Terry, any comments there?
There is a way to do that, and it's actually being done. The problem is economics. Most of the wallboard manufacturers are getting synthetic gypsum for little or no cost delivered to them. We can't make those economics work. And actually the same thing is the case with the Portland cement manufacturers. They consume gypsum, but they're using synthetic gypsum and having it delivered for about $0. And that's just not a model that we've found a way to make work for us financially.
Okay, next question. Is there a fee charged for the recycling pickup, which U.S.A. Gypsum will provide for construction sites within a 50-mile radius of the plant? Terry?
Yes, there is a fee, typically lower than the landfill fee, but there is a fee.
Next question, could you repeat the problems of synthetic gypsum in relation to recycling it?
I don't think there were any problems, were there, Terry?
No, we're not aware of any problems.
All right, that was quick. Have either of the speakers ever presented and or displayed at Professional Recyclers of Pennsylvania, commonly known as PROP, conferences?
I haven't, but I'd be happy to at some point if anyone wants me to.
Okay.
Terry, have you?
We could explore that.
All right, good. Next question. Since the synthetic drywall is chemically the same, do you accept it for recycling? Terry, I guess you do. You get it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we do. We don't know which product is synthetic or regular, but we're making the assumption that with all the synthetic drywall being produced, that we're receiving it.
Okay, next question. Can you give an example of a situation where gypsum would be used, would be reduced to precipitate material from turbid water? Joe, is that a question you might?
Well, that was in my presentation. I'm trying to think of an example. I'm drawing a blank. Terry, do you have any ideas?
Yeah, we supply gypsum for people who add it to their ponds to settle out excess clay that washes in to their ponds. And there are some good studies done in University of Missouri has one, University of Texas has one on how to go about determining the quantity of gypsum you should add to settle out clay particles that contaminate water.
Okay, and our last question, do you know where the gypsum recycler nearest to Colorado is located? Either one of you. No?
There was a recycler in Montana at one time. Not sure if they're still there or in business. I'm not aware of anybody in Colorado. I talked to some people that were thinking about it in the Denver area, but I'm not sure if they ever actually did it.
Yeah, and I would check with Gypsum Recycling America because I know they're expanding their operations, but I don't know if they're in Colorado.
Okay. Well, that's the last question submitted, so I really want to thank the audience for being such great listeners and providing some very interesting questions for our presenters today. And once again, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website, the PARMC.org website, within the next couple of weeks. And you have Joe's email address if you want to send him a question, and I think Terry's information was listed on his presentation, or they're on our webinar announcement if you need to go back there and look at that. So thank you very much, and many thanks to Wayne Bowen of the RMC, who was operating the controls behind the scenes. And without Wayne's efforts, we'd have a tough time getting through this today. So thank you, Wayne. And thanks to all of the participants. And we hope to have you back here again in 3 months for our next Technology Tuesday webinar. Thanks and good afternoon.